John Keats was only 26 when he died of consumption in Rome, where his doctor had ordered him in a last desperate bid to regain health and life. He didn't want to die. He believed that with time his work would wring recognition from a grudging public. And he was in love with Fanny Brawne. She lived next door to this house, his house in Hampstead. She was first his sweetheart and then his fiancée. Both love and work are invoked in this letter Keats wrote to Fanny just 1 month after his first major hemorrhage of the lung and 1 year before his death. The nearer a racer gets to the goal, the more his anxiety becomes. So I, lingering upon the borders of health, feel my impatience increase. Perhaps on your account, I have imagined my illness more serious than it is. How horrid was the chance of slipping into the ground instead of into your arms. The difference is amazing love. Death must come at last. Man must die, as Shallow says. But before that is my fate. I fain would try what more pleasures than you have given so sweet a creature as you can give. Let me have another opportunity of years before me, and I will not die without being remembered. In the same year that he wrote this life-loving letter to Fanny, Keats wrote a poem that gives us a glimpse of a darker and more complex relationship to the idea of his own death. A chilling and at the same time enticing vision of death as a lover.
My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains 1 minute past, and Lethe wards had sunk. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death.
It isn't Keats of the letters, but Keats of the poetry that plunges us into a major current of romantic art, the fascination with death. Like Keats in his Ode to a Nightingale, the Romantics were all half in love with easeful death. The vitality of their creativity, their passion for truth and beauty and feeling, their insistence on a reality as intense as their art, pushed them to the very edge of life. And on the brink of this abyss, they stood mesmerized. The fiery bravura of romantic art, of romantic writing, of poetry and music is shot through with an overpowering awareness of death and the fragility of all mortal things, of power, of love, of beauty, of creativity itself. Many romantic artists died young. Many killed themselves, and many others suffered the lingering death of their creative powers. Their art confirms that death exerted a dark and baleful fascination. For many a time, I have been half in love with easeful death. In the romantic faith, the intense life of feeling cannot survive into middle age. Balzac defines the romantic mood with a tragic sense of life and an obsession with death. After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, Géricault dies of a mysterious illness at the age of 32. Death and madness are the themes of his greatest paintings. His Raft of the Medusa records an incident when a frigate foundered off Senegal. The captain loaded 149 passengers onto a raft and cast it loose. During days alone on the sea, the desperate survivors were driven to mutiny, murder, and cannibalism. It is a painting on a heroic scale, but the only trace of a conventional heroic gesture in this bleak work is ironic, the white scarf being waved at an uncaring horizon.
Bitter is the knowledge that one draws from the voyage. The monotonous and tiny world, today, yesterday, tomorrow, always, shows us our reflections, an oasis of horror in a desert of boredom. Oh, death, my captain, it is time. Let us raise the anchor. This country wearies us, O death. Let us make ready. If sea and sky are both as black as ink, you know our hearts are full of sunshine.
The goal of the longed-for journey is mysterious, as elusive as the island towards which the death barge sails in Berklin's painting. The only certainty is that once embarked on, there is no going back. Even before we have boarded, we have already arrived. Spurning the eternal spring that blossoms sweetly in Rococo paintings, Romanticism discovers the stern symbolism of winter and celebrates its mournful beauty. The contemplation of dying and of death becomes a major romantic theme. The Abbey in the Woods by Caspar David Friedrich.
The question has often come to me, why do you pick as the subject of your painting death so often? Ephemeralness, the grave. In order to live eternally someday, one must surrender frequently to death.
For the Romantics, physical death is only one kind of dying. A constant fear, a constant reality, is the death of creativity, the sudden and merciless drying up of inspiration, inflicting on its victim a kind of living death. The painter Friedrich becomes physically paralyzed. For others, the paralysis is of the imagination or of the will. This is the fate of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He lives into his 60s, but tormented by the loss of his creative power.
In a continual flux. Nothing is constant. All things change around us. We ourselves change. And no one can be sure of loving tomorrow what he loves today. All our plans of happiness in this life are but empty dreams.
Hubert Robert's painting of the tomb of Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Oh, bitter is the knowledge that one draws from the voyage. The monotonous and tiny world, today, yesterday, tomorrow, always, shows us our reflections, an oasis of horror in a desert of boredom. Oh, death, my captain, it is time. Let us raise the anchor. This country wearies us. Oh, death, let us make ready. If sea and sky are both as black as ink, you know our hearts are full of sunshine. Pour on us your poison to refresh us. Oh, this fire so burns our brains, we would drive to the depths of the gulf. Heaven or hell, what matter? If only to find in the depths of the unknown, the new.
Have mercy, heaven, when here I cease to live, and this last act of wretchedness forgive.
The exuberant and bitter suicide poem by a young poet barely 17 years of age, written before his first meal in 3 days, a fatal dose of arsenic. Thomas Chatterton kills himself not out of an excess of feeling, but as a solution to a practical problem. literary failure, and starvation. Within a decade of his death, Chatterton had become the supreme symbol of the Romantic poet, and his suicide a symbol of the inevitable defeat of the ideal by the real. Coleridge writes a monody on the death of Chatterton, confessing how the young poet's suicide haunts the imagination of the poets in their moments of despair.
Poor Chatterton, farewell. Of darkest hues this chaplet cast I on my unshaped tomb, but dare no longer on the sad theme muse, lest kindred woes persuade a kindred doom.
Chatterton was killed by the indifference of his potential public. For many of the Romantics, public rejection of their art was their greatest enemy. The painter Friedrich had to fight against the constant non-understanding of his work.
I'm not so weak as to submit to the demands of the age when they go against my convictions. I spin a cocoon around myself, let others do the same. I shall leave it to time to show what will come of it. A brilliant butterfly, or a maggot.
Dead in 1821 at the age of 25. Shelley, drowned the next year, aged 29. Byron, dead 2 years later at 36. A post-mortem shows his brain and heart to have the symptoms of extreme old age.
Look on me. There is an order of mortals on the earth who do become old in their youth and die ere middle age without the violence of warlike death. Some perishing of pleasure, some of study, some worn with toil, some of mere weariness, some of disease and some insanity, and some of withered or of broken hearts. For this last is a malady which slays more than unnumbered in the lists of fate, taking all shapes and bearing many names. Look upon me, for even of all these things have I partaken, and of all these things one were enough. Then wonder not that I am what I am, but that I ever was, or having been, that I am still on earth.
For the Romantics, death takes on a fatal allure in poems, paintings, in literature and in music, and in the graveyard arts themselves. Death fascinates, tempts, flirts, beckons. Death becomes a seductress, a siren. Shelley's verses are steeped in the Romantics' favorite combination of beauty and terror, attraction and revulsion, life and death.
It lieth, gazing on the midnight sky, upon the cloudy mountain peak, supine. Below, far lands are seen tremblingly. Its horror and its beauty are divine. Upon its lips and eyelids seem to lie loveliness like a shadow, from which shine, fiery and lurid, struggling underneath, the agonies of anguish and of death. Yet it is less the horror than the grace which turns the gazer's spirit into stone, whereon the lineaments of that dead face are graven, till the characters be grown into itself, and thought no more can trace.
Shelley's poem stands as a manifesto of the Romantic's conception of beauty in death. Death and beauty are hideously intermixed in Shelley's brief life. Soon after he ran away with Mary Godwin, the daughter of William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary's half-sister Fanny Imlay committed suicide. She had discovered that she was not Godwin's daughter, but the daughter of her mother's American lover. Less than 3 months later, Harriet Shelley, the poet's wife, whom Shelley had left for Mary, drowned herself in the Serpentine in Hyde Park. Mary and Shelley's baby dies soon after birth, and their second child also dies. Shelley's last poem, unfinished when at the age of 29 he drowned, is called The Triumph of Life. Only hours from his death, Shelley writes with frightening brilliance, gazing out on a universe of death.
And some grew weary of the ghastly dance, and fell, as I have fallen, by the wayside. Those soonest from whose forms most shadows passed, and least of strength and beauty did abide. Then, what is life? I cried.
In vain I try to get a foothold in life. Nothing solid, everything gives way and lets me down. All our hopes and wishes are idle streams, and our successes, phantoms that elude our grasp.
Ah, it would be a beautiful place to kill oneself in.
I dreamed of suicide. We lived in a strange world. We swung between madness and suicide. Some of them killed themselves. One strangled himself with his time. Several died of debauchery in order to escape the boredom of life. It was beautiful.
The world was void. The populous and the powerful was a lump, seasonless, herbless, treeless, manless, lifeless, a lump of death, a chaos of hard clay. The rivers, lakes, and oceans all stood still, and nothing stirred within their silent depths.
Polar Sea, or The Wreck of the Hope, by Caspar David Friedrich. Friedrich, in a letter of 1816.
I was lazy for a while and felt quite incapable of doing anything. Nothing would flow from inside. The well was dry. I was empty. Nothing would appeal to me from the outside either. What use is work ultimately if nothing is accomplished by it?
In the romantic universe, nothing is secure. The only certainty is change. Like creativity, like love, like life itself, power crumbles into dust. The engravings of Piranesi infect the romantic's imagination and are endlessly reborn in paintings, poems, and opium dreams.
Why have they not buried me deep enough? Is it kind to have made me a grave so rough? Me, that was never a quiet sleeper. Maybe still I am but half dead. Then I cannot be wholly dumb. I will cry to the steps above my head, and somebody, surely, some kind heart will come to bury me deeper. Ever so little deeper.
The cult of the Gothic novel invents a world of dungeons, ghosts, and haunted forests. Mrs. Radcliffe writes the popular Mysteries of Udolpho.
Emily gazed with melancholy awe upon the castle, for though it was now lighted up by the setting sun, the Gothic greatness of its features and its mouldering walls of dark grey stone rendered it a gloomy and sublime object. As she gazed, the light died away on its walls, leaving a melancholy purple tint which spread deeper and deeper, and the whole edifice was invested with the solemn duskiness of evening, silent, lonely, and sublime. It seemed to frown defiance on all who dared to invade its solitary reign.
What is this death? A quiet of the heart? The whole of that of which we are a part? For life is but a vision. What I see of all which lives alone is life to me. And being so, the absent are the dead, who haunt us from tranquility, and spread a dreary shroud around us, and invest with sad remembrances our hours of rest. The absent are the dead, for they are cold, and ne'er can be what once we did behold, and they are changed and cheerless. Or if yet the unforgotten do not all forget, since thus divided, equal must it be if the deep barrier be of earth or sea. It may be both, but one day end it must in the dark union of insensate dust. The under-earth inhabitants, are they but mingled millions decomposed to clay? The ashes of 1,000 ages spread wherever man has trodden or shall tread? Or do they in their silent cities dwell, each in his incommunicative cell? Or have they their own language, and a sense of breathless being, darkened and intense as midnight in her solitude. O earth, where are the past, and wherefore have they birth? The dead are thy inheritors, and we but bubbles on thy surface, and the key of thy profundity is in the grave, the ebon portal of thy peopled cave, where I would walk in spirit, and behold our elements resolved to things untold, and fathom hidden wonders, and explore the essence of great bosoms now no more.
From the suicide note of a 17-year-old girl. I am undertaking a long journey. If I should succeed, I ask that I be buried only after I am altogether dead, since it is very disagreeable to wake up in a coffin in the earth.
Buried Alive by Antoine Wiertz.
If thou regrettest thy youth, why live?
In romantic art, the skeleton has 1,000 ways of appearing and disappearing. In Antoine Wiertz' The Beautiful Rosine, the girl confronts it in her mirror. But the girl calmly regards this bony image of herself, which warns her of the fragility of her beauty.
And yet you will be this excrement, this horrible stench. O star of my eyes, sun of my being, you, my angel, my passion.
The fragility of beauty. Peace, peace. He is not dead, he doth not sleep. He hath awakened from the dream of life. 'Tis we, who lost in stormy visions, keep with phantoms an unprofitable strife, and in mad trance strike with our spirit's knife invulnerable nothings. We decay, like corpses in a charnel. Fear and grief convulse us and consume us day by day, and cold hopes swarm like worms within our living clay.
Happiness is a lasting state which does not seem to be made for man in this world. Everything here on earth is in a continual flux. Nothing is constant. All things change round us. We ourselves change. And no one can be sure of loving tomorrow what he loves today. All our plans of happiness in this life are but empty dreams.
Yet now despair itself is mild, even as the winds and waters are. I could lie down like a tired child and weep away this life of care which I have borne and yet must bear, till death, like sleep, might steal on me, and I might feel in the warm air my cheek grow cold. and hear the sea breathe o'er my dying brain its last monotony.
The infinite variety of cemeteries. The functional cemeteries where the corpses of soldiers are aligned in total equality and total symmetry, as if a phantom general waited for the order to inspect. The village cemetery, full of a rustic poetry and of a touching modesty. The romantic cemetery.
Here pause. These graves are all too young as yet to have outgrown the sorrow which consigned its charge to each. And if the seal is set, here, on one fountain of a mourning mind, break it not thou. Too surely shalt thou find thine own well full, if thou returnest home of tears and gall. From the world's bitter wind, seek shelter in the shadow of the tomb. What Adonais is, why fear we to become?
The world's bitter wind. In the Romantic Age, art was losing its traditional public and had not yet found a new one. The 18th century assumption that art belonged to patrons, that it was paid for by them, that it pleasured them, was slashed to ribbons by the work of Géricault, Baudelaire, by artists like Friedrich, who wrote, "I am not so weak as to submit to the demands of the age when they are against my convictions. I spin a cocoon round myself. Let others do the same." For many, the cocoon was not protection enough. Shelley, in his preface to Adonais, a posthumous song of praise to Keats, lays the blame for his early death on the savage criticism of his Endymion, which produced the most violent effect on his susceptible mind. A year later, Shelley too was dead. He was 30 years old. For his elegy, he has Byron's response to his death. "There is thus another man gone, about whom the world was ill-naturedly and ignorantly and brutally mistaken." Disgusted with the pettiness and the meanness and the boredom of the world, the Romantics looked to death as a seductive alternative. At the end of Adonais, Shelley looks forward to his own death.
Why linger? Why turn back? Why shrink, my heart? Thy hopes are gone before. From all things here they have departed. Thou shouldst now depart. A light is passed from the revolving year, and man and woman. And what still is dear attracts to crush, repels to make thee wither. The soft sky smiles, the low wind whispers near. 'Tis Adonais calls. O hasten thither. No more let life divide what death can join together.
The lessons of mortality. Ambition and fame are mere vanity. The only true democracy is death.